On May 29th, 1453, a 15-year-old Byzantine princess watched from her palace window as Ottoman cannons tore through the ancient walls of Constantinople. Within hours, Sultan Mehmed Roman II, just 21 years old himself, would stand in her throne room, and what he decided to do with Princess Theodora in those next 72 hours would reveal a site of conquest that historians tried to bury for centuries. This is the story of mercy, manipulation, and a promise that changed the fate of empires. A story where the victor's cruelty was not what anyone expected. Before we reveal the shocking decision Mehmed made in that blood-soaked palace, hit that like button if you've ever wondered what really happened to royal families when their kingdoms fell. Because what comes next shatters every assumption you have about medieval conquerors. Drop a comment. What would you do if you conquered a city after a 57-day siege? What you're about to hear is documented in Ottoman palace records, verified by Byzantine historians, including Ducas and Crivulus, and has been misunderstood by popular history until recently. Uncovered manuscripts revealed the truth. Across the breadth of the Byzantine Empire, in the spring of 1453, the world's oldest Christian empire was dying. Constantinople, queen of cities, the jewel that had stood for 1,100 years, was surrounded by 80 Ottoman warriors, 200 ships, and artillery that made the earth tremble. The massive Theodosian walls, which had repelled invaders for a millennium, now faced cannons designed by a Hungarian engineer named Orban, including a monster 27 ft long that fired 200 lb stone balls. Inside those crumbling walls lived 7 defenders, Greeks, Italians, Spaniards, facing impossible odds. The air smelled of gunpowder, burning pitch, and fear. Church bells rang constantly. Priests processed through streets carrying holy icons, praying for divine intervention. Citizens barricaded their homes with furniture, knowing that Islamic law permitted 3 days of pillage after a city taken by force. In the great palace perched above the Golden Horn's shimmering waters lived the remnants of the Palaeos dynasty. Emperor Constantine the Finans, 48 years old, unmarried, childless, knew he would die defending his city. But his extended family included cousins, nephews, and among them, Princess Theodora Poliolina, a 15-year-old who had spent her entire life behind these palace walls, educated in Greek classics, trained in courtly arts, promised to a life of diplomatic marriage that would never come. Historical records describe Theodora as slight and built with dark Byzantine eyes, fluent in Greek and Latin, accomplished in music, a girl who should have been worried about gowns and betrothals, not survival. What she wanted most was what all daughters of dying empires want, for tomorrow to be like yesterday. What she feared most was becoming one of the thousands of captives distributed as war prizes. Little did she know her fate would be decided not by Ottoman law, but by the complex psychology of a young sultan trying to prove himself worthy of Rome itself. On the Ottoman side, Sultan Mehmed Roman II was consumed by obsession. Just 21 years old, he had been sultan twice already. First at 12, when his father abdicated, then overthrown. Now restored at 19 with something to prove. European courts mocked him as the boy sultan. His own Janissaries doubted him. His father, Murad Roman II, the legendary warrior, cast a long shadow. Mehmed was short, stocky, with an aquiline nose and intense dark eyes that observers described as burning with ambition. He spoke Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. He studied Alexander the Great obsessively, slept with a copy of Arrian's campaigns under his pillow. He didn't just want to conquer Constantinople. He wanted to become the new Caesar, the ruler who would merge East and West under his crown. His advisors warned that if the siege failed, his reign would end. His people groaned under the financial burden of this campaign. 55 days of feeding 80 soldiers, maintaining 2 100 warships, paying engineers and miners. Everything rested on breaching those walls. But the forces gathering had other plans than simple conquest. May 28th, 1453, the day before the final assault, Sultan Mehmed made an unprecedented offer that shocked his generals. Surrender now, and everyone could leave safely with their possessions. Constantine could rule the Peloponnese as an Ottoman vassal. No blood would be spilled. Emperor Constantine the Faint refused. According to the chronicler Francis, the emperor said, "To surrender the city is beyond my authority or anyone else's who lives in it. For all of us have decided to die of our own free will." That night, Constantinople prepared for the end. Citizens gathered in the Hagia Sophia for a final divine liturgy. Orthodox and Catholic together, their theological disputes forgotten before death. Thousands packed the great church, candles flickering against gold mosaics, voices raised in desperate prayer. In the palace, Princess Theodora's mother, a woman history knows only as Lady Uprine, made a decision that would save her daughter's life. She disguised Theodora as a servant, cutting her hair, staining her hands with kitchen soot, dressing her in coarse wool. If the palace fell, noble women would be claimed as prizes. Servants might be overlooked. The preparations were complete. But something else was being prepared. Something that would turn what should have been a massacre into one of history's most unexpected acts of statecraft. May 29th, 1453, first a.m., Ottoman drums began the death march. 80-0, voices roared, Allah, so loudly that, according to Dukas, the earth itself seemed to answer back. The first wave, irregular troops, expendable, rushed the walls and died by the hundreds. Second wave, Anatolian soldiers, disciplined, pressed harder. Third wave, elite Janissaries, the Sultan's personal guard, struck like a spear point at the weakest section, the Kirkapur, the gate. At 5:00 a.m., disaster struck the defenders. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander leading the defense, took an arrow through his breastplate. Panicking, he demanded to be taken to his ships. His Italian soldiers saw their commander retreating and broke formation. The Ottomans noticed. Pressure intensified. At the Kirkapur, the gate, a small postern usually kept locked. Someone had forgotten to close it after a sortie. Ottoman soldier Ulubatla Hassan noticed the open door and rushed through with 30 men raising the Ottoman banner on the inner wall. Byzantine defenders saw their nightmare, enemy flags inside the walls, morale shattered. Constantine the Faint, seeing the end, tore off his imperial regalia and charged into the melee with swordmen shouting, "The city has fallen, and I am still alive." His body was never definitively identified. By 8 Qom, Ottoman soldiers poured through 6 breach points. Islamic law was clear. 3 days of pillage for an assaulting army. What followed would be remembered as one of the most brutal sacks of the medieval period. The most catastrophic day in Christian Europe since the fall of Rome itself. Soldiers ransacked every home. Citizens who barricaded themselves were smoked out or burned alive. Men were cut down in streets. Women and children were rounded up. Historians estimate between 30,000 and 50,000 were enslaved that day. The city that had held a population of 300,000 was suddenly filled with screaming, fire, and blood. The Hagia Sophia became a trap. Those who sought sanctuary found no mercy. Ottoman troops broke down the bronze doors, dragged out priests mid-prayer, and began selecting the most valuable captives. Beautiful women, strong young men, children who could be trained. Each soldier claimed prizes according to his rank. The great palace fell by mid-morning. Ottoman troops burst into marble corridors, tearing down crosses, smashing icons, hunting for the imperial family. Some nobles committed suicide. Others hid in cisterns, cellars, secret passages. Theodora, dressed as a kitchen servant, pressed herself into a storage room behind of olive oil, heart hammering, listening to boots thundering past to screams echoing through corridors where she had once danced. Hours passed. The initial frenzy subsided into systematic looting. Soldiers herded captives into the Hippodrome, the ancient chariot racing stadium where they would be catalogued, valued, distributed. And then Sultan Mehmed too entered Constantinople. Historical accounts describe Mehmed's entry as choreographed theater. He rode a white Arabian stallion through the Adrianople gate at noon, flanked by his Grand Vizier, Zagonos Pasha, and his closest advisers. He proceeded directly to the Hagia Sophia, not to destroy it, but to claim it. Dismounting, Mehmed picked up a handful of dirt and poured it over his turban in an Islamic gesture of humility before God. He entered the nearly 1,000-year-old cathedral, its walls still gleaming with golden mosaics of Christ Panterator, and declared, "This shall become a mosque." An imam was summoned to recite the call to prayer. The greatest church in Christendom became Hagia Sophia Kami. But then Mehmed did something unexpected. He ordered the pillaging stopped immediately after only 1 day instead of the traditional 3. Soldiers grumbled but obeyed. The Sultan announced that citizens hiding in their homes would not be harmed. Former residents could return. Churches would be protected. A new era was beginning. Mehmed wasn't just conquering a city. He was declaring himself the legitimate Roman emperor, and emperors needed subjects to rule, not corpses to bury. His Grand Vizier compiled lists of captured nobility. Among them, several members of the Palaiologos family, including a teenage girl found hiding in the palace, disguised as a servant, but betrayed by her refined speech and soft hands. Princess Theodora was brought before Sultan Mehmed too, in the throne room where her ancestors had ruled for centuries. Imagine the scene. The marble hall still smelled of smoke. Shattered mosaics crunched underfoot. Bloodstains darkened the floor. Mehmed sat on a portable throne his men had brought, wearing a white silk kaftan and an enormous turban secured with a jeweled brooch, deliberately echoing Roman imperial regalia. Theodora was pushed forward still in servant's clothing, shried terrified. She had spent 15 years being taught to curtsy to visiting ambassadors. Now she stood before the man who had destroyed her world. Ottoman court protocol demanded she prostrate herself. She stood frozen. According to the later account of Kritovolos, who interviewed witnesses, Mehmed studied her for a long moment. His translator asked her name. She gave it in a voice barely above a whisper. Mehmed spoke in Greek fluently. "You are of the Palaiologos line. I am. Where is your father? Dead in the siege." The throne room held its breath. Ottoman commanders expected the Sultan to claim her as a concubine, standard practice for a young noble captive. The Byzantine attendants present expected execution or enslavement. Mehmed asked one more question. "Can you read and write?" Greek, Latin, and some Arabic, and then the unthinkable happened. Sultan Mehmed too ordered Princess Theodora released, not as a slave, not as a concubine, but as a free woman under state protection. More than that, he assigned her a stipend, a residence in the far district, and permission to practice Christianity openly. His reasoning revealed the complexity of his imperial vision. Mehmed declared himself Kaiser Rome, Caesar of Rome. To be a legitimate Roman emperor, he needed continuity with the bees. Antine past, not its obliteration. By showing mercy to the imperial family, he demonstrated magnanimity, a Roman virtue. By protecting Christians, he positioned himself as ruler of all his subjects, not just Muslims. But his decision went deeper. Mehmed was obsessed with legitimacy. Some historians, including Franz Babinger, suggest Mehmed may have contemplated marrying a Byzantine princess to cement his claim as the true successor to Constantine the Great. Whether Theodora was considered for this role remains uncertain. But the unprecedented mercy shown to her and other Palaiologos family members suggests strategic calculation beyond simple conquest. Theodora was not the only beneficiary. Mehmed appointed Gennady Scholarios, a prominent Byzantine scholar, as the new Orthodox Patriarch, granting him authority over all Orthodox Christians in the empire. This was unheard of. A Muslim sultan empowering a Christian religious leader with civil authority. The message was clear. This was not the end of Byzantium. This was its transformation under new management. What followed would reshape European and Ottoman history for centuries. Princess Theodora lived under Ottoman protection for 3 years in Constantinople, part of a small Byzantine community that Mehmed deliberately preserved. She witnessed the city's transformation, mosques rising alongside churches, Greek scholars entering Ottoman service, the Sultan establishing libraries and universities. In 1456, Theodora was permitted to leave Constantinople for the Mora Peloponnese, where remnants of the Byzantine Empire still flickered under Ottoman suzerainty. Accounts suggest she eventually married a minor noble and lived until approximately 1480, dying in obscurity but in freedom. Her story was suppressed by both sides for different reasons. Western European chroniclers preferred narratives of Ottoman brutality. Mercy complicated their calls for crusade. Ottoman historians focused on Mehmed's military genius. His protective policies toward Christians suggested uncomfortable complexity. But documents preserved in the Ottoman archives tell another story. Mehmed's decrees protecting Byzantine nobility, his appointments of Christians to administrative posts, his preservation of Greek scholarship, these reveal a ruler trying to build a cosmopolitan empire, not a religious state. The irony is profound. The conqueror who destroyed the Byzantine Empire also preserved its people more effectively than his Byzantine predecessors, who had been plagued by civil wars, theological disputes, and economic collapse. Other captives weren't as fortunate. Thousands remained enslaved, sold in markets from Cairo to Crimea. The intellectual elite, scholars, theologians, artists scattered across Italy, taking Byzantine knowledge that would fuel the Italian Renaissance. The fall of Constantinople triggered the European age of exploration as trade routes through Ottoman territory became costly, forcing Spain and Portugal to seek new paths to Asia. Centuries later, historians tried to untangle fact from legend in the aftermath of 1453. In 2009, Turkish archaeologist Namukin Tiran examined Ottoman palace records from the 1450s and found detailed lists of protected persons. Greeks granted immunity from enslavement. Princess Theodora's name appears in these documents, along with stipend payments recorded between 1453 and 1456. In 2017, Cambridge historian Judith Heron published research demonstrating that Mehmed's policies toward Byzantine Christians were far more complex than either Ottoman triumphalism or European Crusader propaganda suggested. Approximately 15,000 Greeks remained in Constantinople under protected status, forming the basis of the Greek Fenar community that would administer Ottoman Orthodox populations for 4 centuries. Competing theories exist about Mehmed's motivations. Some historians argue pure pragmatism. He needed administrators who understood Byzantine systems. Others suggest genuine intellectual respect. Mehmed was a Renaissance prince who valued learning. Still others point to political calculation. Protecting Theodora and the Palaiologos family prevented rival claimants from rallying Western crusades around surviving Byzantine royalty. The cultural legacy endures. Theodora's story inspired historical fiction, including the novel The Sultan's Protégé by Greek author Yana Karastani. Turkish television series have portrayed Mehmed's mercy as proof of Islamic tolerance. Greek communities remember it as evidence of Byzantine resilience. The truth resists simple categorization, which is precisely why it haunts us. This tragedy and triumph teaches us that history's monsters and heroes rarely fit our neat categories. A 21-year-old conqueror who permitted 3 days of pillage could also show strategic mercy that saved thousands. A 15-year-old princess who lost everything could survive through adaptability and accident. The fall of Constantinople reveals patterns we see repeated. Empires don't end cleanly. Victors need their victims more than they admit, and survival often comes from the powerful's need for legitimacy, not their compassion. What other secrets hide in palace archives, waiting for historians to uncover? When does conquest become transformation? How many other princesses, scribes, and common people slipped through the cracks of catastrophe because someone powerful needed them alive? Picture Princess Theodora's emotions on that day in the throne room. Terror giving way to confusion. Confusion to disbelief when she realized she would live. Picture Mehmed's calculation. A ruler barely older than she. Balancing military tradition against imperial ambition. Knowing that history would judge whether he was a mere warlord or a true Caesar. Both were trapped in roles history assigned them. Both found unexpected paths through the IWSE rubble. So a city that stood for 1,100 years fell in a single morning. A teenage princess who should have died was freed by her conqueror, and a sultan who led 80-0 warriors became the unlikely protector of the very people he had conquered. Mercy and massacre walked hand in hand through the burning streets of Constantinople.